Good morning, everybody. It's nice weather here in Copenhagen. It was much colder in Switzerland, so I'm glad we made it a little bit too long walk this morning to find Overgaden. But saw a bit of the canals of the city and the wind, and I think we are awake now. I'm Susann Wintsch, and I'm working in Switzerland as a curator and as a teacher at the Art University in Zurich. I was invited here to give a short introduction, an overview into the relationship between art and science. I took the title, "The Science is the Bit We Always Hang On To," from a statement from David Buckland, the British artist. I will later share this video with you. I like this sentence because it's an ambivalent and an open remark. It talks about the hegemony of science and our dependence on it. At the same time, it contains a connection to hope. This remark concisely expresses, in my opinion, the complicated relationship between science and art. Artists have been involved into science for a long time, and still are. I can see this daily in my work as a curator. But since about 10 years, a huge debate was open about artist relation in science, and still is. It came upon from the art academies, and I'm very much concerned about this, since I'm teaching art and theory and contemporary art at the Zurich University of the Arts, the former academy in Zurich. So let me start with the introduction with the very present, before going into the past and the possible future with exemplary examples. As I had mentioned before, it was 10 years ago that in the academies, when the relation between art and science got a sudden urgence. Why is this? The moment in time merged with the Bologna reform in many European countries. In Switzerland, the Bologna reform caused radical changes in the educational system. Before, our educational systems and institutions did not follow the bachelor and the master system. Also, the different educational systems were very independent from one each other. Now, the Bologna reform caused radical changes, especially for the former art academies. We can read in their programs, at least it is the case in Switzerland, words like innovation, creativity, and research. Suddenly, art academies are compelled to become academic. They have to take a scientific stand and are now required to do research. That's why the term artistic research has become an important trigger for education in further artists or in future artists. What fascinates me here, both as a teacher and a curator, is the idea that if you educate art like research, it will have consequences for art in general. I would like to share my thoughts on what occurrences made me think like that. The initial text published and panels searched at first for the differences and the common ground between art and science. Today, it is more or less agreed that science and art have in common the process as a tool to gain understanding and insight. Another common ground for all research in science, or as we say here, natural science, is that it obtains results. For the humanities, the research culminates in a thesis. But for the field of art, it is again different. In the art, the potential is in the cracks, the interferences. I'm quoting now what I read in the books. The leaps, the paradoxes, the disagreements, the fractures, the deconstructions, in the unsuccessful, in the inappropriate, in the excluded, and in that which was not taught. That's what I learned by reading text and hearing in the panels. But if you listen carefully to these words, you can hear that these arguments are directed towards defense. Defense against the imposition of science. I also found another group of arguments trying to define what is art, if not results or a thesis. In the art, okay, there is a potential in biting questions to challenge answers. Still others evoke imagination as a purpose. Likewise, dreams make knowledge unstable by pointing out opportunities. You can hear that these arguments are rather based on hope and open up for dialogue. If you compare the two sides in the art academies, on the one hand, the defending sector with the cracks, the inappropriate, the disagreement, and on the other hand, the dialogue sector with the imagination, the open questions, and the dream, you can see that there is quite a gap between the two camps. The defending camp, or the defending group, so to say, is probably based on the fear that education of art could be dominated by a hidden neoliberalism, that it could be arranged by science, that it would be exploited for their economy. Is art being threatened as a sovereign field, as a refuge for independent thinking? On the other hand, I think that the dialogue group expects a reorganization of the arts, that it will be part of the topics and the problem of today. In short, a potential of opportunities for a new role of art in our society. But before I go deeper in it, let me look at the debate altogether. You can easily see that it argues within the framework of a meta-discourse. It reveals a founding analysis of the general characteristics of art, always in comparison to science, of course. It reveals a general reflection. However, there is something strange about these generalizations, since it is also agreed that each work of art is a singular occasion, claiming a selected approach, aiming for exclusiveness. In the discourse, examples about artists and projects are only done very cursory. For this reason, a comprehensive analysis about artists who practice artist research has not yet been compiled. But I think we need such compilations to get more insight about the methodology used by artists to come a step further, to enable a deeper critique or theory on artistic research. The Nigerian curator Okwe Emerson detected as early as 1999 that the art market asked primarily for objects. The art market, thus he said, wants to be delivered with finalized products. In fact, it is calculated that artworks can yield a profit margin 300 times greater than stocks. Can you imagine? That's probably why Emerson asked if it was possible for new ideas to evolve in laboratory experiments. His question was whether or not artistic research might be a field that the market cannot easily comprehend. Of course, we can say that the behavior of the market seems to prove that. But then we must also admit that perhaps other institutions are grasping the situation. Knowledge is to be sold nowadays. This is a crucial point. Lately, a tendency for knowledge to be replaced by information was detected. Information is no longer taught using examples from history. And present-day experience, but rather presented as lifeless facts. This is why I think that the German curator Ute Vorköpper was right when she disagrees very much that research is a hidden exploitation of the arts with hope for innovation. On the contrary, as she writes, art schools must challenge their students to the use of theory even more intensely, because theory can reduce myth. It produces richness, and in this way, theory prevents the art students from being naively trained to merely illustrate popular and commercial needs. But yes, the science represents the present time, but we all seem to helplessly welcome it. Thus, the German philosopher Peter Sloterdijk said very recently, when he published a book entitled Modernity's Enfant Terrible in 2014, he describes modernism as the accelerated speed. In his opinion, modern time constantly releases more energy that the civilization can control. Thus, restraint and habits break down. We value the quickly moving and no longer want to know about long-term stability and traditional behavior. Here, I want to leave the discussion about the art academies and look for further ideas that might help to get more light into it from outside. Firstly, from the past, and secondly, from the present and possible future in the relation of science and arts. I'm going back into the 19th and 20th century. My first two examples come both from the field of the art. This is important. The German philosopher Johannes Türk examined Johann Wolfgang Goethe, Thomas Mann, Marcel Proust and Sigmund Freud's novels and writings about the latest discoveries in medical immunology. For instance, in Thomas Mann's famous novel The Buddenbrooks, the heir marries a very fragile woman. The result is the birth of an even more fragile boy. He would be an artist, but he will be broken by his father. The boy dies, and the formerly wealthy and powerful family falls apart and vanishes. Following these and other books, Johannes Türk found a very interesting thesis that goes as follows. Writing in the 19th century was about experiences that would perhaps be done later by the reader. In this way, the reader could absorb beforehand ideas about possible consequences, like warnings and liberations, of his future activities, He got vaccinated for his actions to come. A second example is about a German playwright, Bertolt Brecht, who realized very early, even before he read Marx, that science was about to become the force of production. With technology, that was his thought, new forms of collectives would emerge. He was especially interested in modern nuclear physics. It enabled him to describe the smaller particles in relation to the phenomenon of masses, as well as the way in which humans could live together and react with one each other. Thus, one could say that Brecht was concerned with science because it gave him an abstract model to present his political views. After returning to East Germany, the former GDR, which is the German Democratic Republic, that doesn't exist any longer, after returning from many years of exile, he wrote down this theory in a small publication entitled The Theatre of the Scientific Age in 1949. Why did I choose these two examples? Bertolt Brecht and the authors Goethe, Proust, Mann, and Freud used the latest science to describe the vulnerability of life. This method of thinking seems important to me. It goes much further than simply document what's going on in the science. It exceeds pure metaphoric analogies. It transforms the knowledge of science to portray the human society. From the other side, from the science, however, in the 18th and 19th century, interferences of the human scale are done with much lesser elan and intellectual enrichment. As the French physician Jean-Marc Lévy-Leblanc, we will meet him today, I think, said in an interview, is that science, owing to his specialization, has lost culture at all. This is probably why the philosopher Michel Foucault, French as well, identified in his book The Order of Things that modern science has developed from itself only. For the sciences, only in the 1970s appears a shift. Science became recognized as a social praxis, bound within an historical relation. Now science no longer consists of pure theory, but it is oriented also by action. Science is staged and performed. It depends on the body, the gestures, the principles, and the convictions of the author. In 1984, to step further forward, the Austrian philosopher Paul Feyerabend wrote a book called Science as Art, a very interesting title, where he noted that in science as in art, stable basic conditions are not provided. Therefore, since science is no more than an opinion, there is no reason to give it authority. Furthermore, Feyerabend stresses that science develops style as in the art, but all styles are man-made. Similarly, the Swiss sociologist Lucius Burckhardt discovers the same procedure in decision for both sciences and the art. To make a decision or to discuss a style is a social action, occasionally an unconscious process, but more often a direct action based on intuition. As Hans-Jürg Reinberger said, he was director for many years at the Max Planck Institute for Scientific History in Berlin. What happens in the modern laboratory is closer to the production of the studio than generally accepted. Nevertheless, it was not in the sciences, but in the arts that the body in field research went decisive. I will show you now a short sequence of video of Bruce Nauman's performance, dance or exercise on a square. Nauman started in the late 1960s to question what an artist does in his studio. In the work Dancer or Exercise of a Square of 1967 to 68, he selected a field of examination. He made a square on his studio floor from masking tape and marked the halfway point on each side. To the sound of a metronome, beginning at one corner, he methodically moves around the perimeter of a square. Sometimes he faces its interior and sometimes outwards. Each step is the equivalent of half the length of one side of the taped square. In this example, however, field research means studio research. The artist revolves around a small surface, a studio within a studio. This is in fact an artwork, an ephemeral sculpture that he tests with his body, for his body and as his body. With this gesture, he maintains a strict rhythm to control the piece. The strictness makes the randomness of the things lying on the floor catch our eyes. Obviously, they have a function, if only to point out the dimension of the entire studio, where the piece is created. Thanks to this contrast, we can see that the artist hesitates sometimes. We can also discern his shadow, and that his right leg takes a shorter step than his left one. Now I'm coming to the present day, with one example of each science and art. Thus, my quest, where science might lead in the sense of Thomas Mann or Bertolt Brecht, as a real source for its work, is still open. I do find it in the contemporary. A perfect example might be the French economist Thomas Piketty. He wrote the book Capital in the 21st Century, first published in France in 2013, last year. With his work, he ate great admiration and great critique as well. The latter revolves around his use of numbers. As an economist, he His book is full of statistics, of course. However, the book brings together economy, history, and social science to plead for justice by speaking about the distribution of capital, income, and property from the poor to the rich in all Western nations, including India, China, and other newly industrialized nations, with statistics available from the 18th century until today, so quite a work. We did, and now it comes. Piketty also uses film and literature, which is quite unexpected. I'm quoting from his introduction. Especially the novels of Jane Austen and Honoré de Balzac paint striking portraits of the distribution of wealth between Britain and France between 1719 and 1830. Both novelists were intimately acquainted with the hierarchy of wealth in their respective societies. They grasped the hidden contours of wealth and its inevitable implications for the lives of man and women, including their martial strategies and personal hopes and disappointments. These and other novelists depicted the effects of inequality with a verisimilitude and evocative power that no statistical or theoretical analysis can match. Researching in this manner, Piketty used what the literary scholar Robert Pogue Harrison called the principle of truth. I'm quoting, "Truth is not based on certainty, but proceeds on certainty," unquote. Because Austen proceeds from data, from lived experience, she could be a true source for Piketty. Another very nice example now for another art project, for an art project, is Cape Farewell, founded by the British artist David Buckland in 2000. The story, so it can be read on the website, is about the science of climate change. The personals are scientists and artists. The goal is a human-scale vision of the future offered by artists. I will give you now an introduction by one of Cape Farewell's videos.
In May of 2003, the schooner Norderlicht set out from the port of Tromsø in northern Norway. Hauling up the sails alongside the Dutch crew was a group of 20 artists and scientists, teachers and journalists. For the next 2 weeks, the ship would be their home and their workplace as they sailed across the Barents Sea towards the high Arctic. This was the beginning of the first Cape Farewell expedition, the brainchild of photographer and video artist David Buckland. The aim of the voyage was to raise public awareness about global warming.
Okay, so we're on a boat and we've got a mixture of artists and scientists, and the scientists come from the people I've worked with before. I mean, they're fantastic scientists. They've been up to the Arctic, they're dealing in this territory. Wherever Cape Farewell goes, it's led by the science. So the science is the bit that we always hang on to, and I think in a way is its central structure. The artists on board, I mean, that is, you know, I call them writers. Everybody on board is in a way a writer, whether it's like Kate, who's a musician, an architect who writes buildings, or a writer, or a poet, or, you know, whatever, painter who's kind of writing the material. So you put the two together and they mix. And the subject matter is climate change. But what you learn about climate change is that actually it's such a strange grey subject, amorphous subject. You can't go head on at it. And you understand it, that, okay, yeah, we've got to do something about it because the science says we've got to do something about it. But at the end of the day, it's a cultural responsibility. It's the way we live that is causing climate change. if you're kind of going to challenge that we've got to think about evolving another way, another structure for existence, that means a shift. If you get a shift, you will always find artists in that place, because that's their territory. They like it when it's unstable and exciting going forward. So that's why the artists, they should be here. This is their central place to be. So you put those two together, the scientific guys have told us we've got a problem, and then you put the artist guys who go, come on, now we've got to really figure out what is the future, what is the inspiration of going forward. And that's what we're here to do.
I think Cape Farewell is a very good example. It shows how exposure from both sides, from artists and scientists, forms the condition for a dialogue. But what can we say are the methods that allow truth to proceed from certainty, as Harrison put it? Looking for current statements by artists, the results are not surprising. As you have probably guessed, they consist of beauty, imagination, and sympathy. I'm just picking up some interesting remarks. About beauty, the German composer Heiner Goebbels, 2014, agrees completely with the playwright Heiner Müller, who was born in the GDR in the former Eastern Germany as well. And Müller says, in fact, the strange is the beautiful. Theatre must be beautiful, even when portraying horror. Beauty is the strangest thing in our reality. Otherwise, you don't do anything if you don't feel the need. Insufficiency of the world. The insufficiency of reality is the source of inspiration, whether in theatre, in visual art, or in literature. One wishes another world, one wishes something else, one wishes that everything simply adhered to the golden ratio. About imagination. Heiner Goebbels himself adds in the same essay that one has to refrain from confusing the stage with reality, talking about theatre as well. He wants a different portrait of mankind, not that does not denounce reality. For instance, he mentions that perhaps Hamlet could be depicted as a banker, surrounded by the mafia, to show the bad character of the 21st century. But he believes that he works differently, and he wants to create his own artistic reality instead. The French art historian and philosopher Georges Ubermann wrote in 2003, "To understand, you must imagine." To avoid being misunderstood, he added later in an interview, "One cannot rely only on a picture." The Spanish curator Chus Martinez, curator for the last Documenta in Kassel, writes 2011 in her essay about the process of the exhibition, which she understands as to be artistic research, that meaning arises through fiction. The Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan said, this is a very interesting statement, "I think of art as its most significant as a due line, a distant early warning system that can always be relied on to tell the older culture what is beginning to happen." About sympathy. English novelist and screenwriter John McEwan said in David Buckland's video, "I was wondering if there was some way to look at the subject both artistically and sympathetically, to look from the point of view at our impulse to refuse. I mean, it includes all of us, the consumer, the polluter, the spoiler. We all are weak and lazy and stupid in this respect." And altogether, maybe quoting the French novelist Matthias Hénard, who said in an interview lately published in a newspaper, "Writing is perhaps ready to transform the horror in something else. In there is humanity. In there lies the mystery of art, the transformation of one object into another." And so I'm coming to my conclusion. Okay. Where does the uncertainty in the debate about art and research lead? It is a long journey to the wish for ethics, in my opinion. The real quest is not about connecting or separating from science, but if one can agree upon any objective, it would be to set priorities for the world that surrounds us. And this would make the contact between art and science, as I believe, fertile. Interestingly, in science, this obligation has been formulated many times, most prominently in 2011 by the German politician Helmut Schmidt, who was West Germany's chancellor for many years. He said in a speech in the Max Planck Institute in Berlin, "Scientists and researchers specialize to an alarmingly degree. As part of the elite, they carry a special responsibility for humanity. Thus, science today is not only, how Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker said, a socially organized search for insight, but at the same time, science is a search for insight with an obligation to responsibility." Nobody would dare to say something similar about the arts. The end of my lecture is meant to be the beginning of a discussion. I have tried to open up the field and its complex aspects and stress on points that are important for my understanding of art. Many questions are therefore only cursorily touched. Some of them might be discussed in the lectures to be followed. I'm looking forward to them. Thank you.